Hey guys, welcome back to the Design the Life You Love with Lynz podcast. I'm so happy you're here. This is the podcast where we talk about intentionally living your life, following your intuition, your whisper, your guidance, and living a life that truly lights you up. I'm so happy you are here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Let's dive in. Good morning, loves. Today on the podcast, we have Talor Stewart. He is an architect from Conscious Home Design, and he has some really interesting topics for us to cover today about living and designing your home with intention. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes.
Great. Yeah. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for having me as a guest on your podcast. I'm really delighted to connect with you and also have a great conversation that I think everyone listening is going to find value in. You know, not everyone is going to hire an architect in their life. I think most people end up doing the best they can with the walls they have. And, while the ability to build a new home or do a deep renovation is gives you the opportunity for a real quantum leap and sort of in terms of creating your future or taking charge of your destiny. There are little things that even if you're just living in a rental, that you can do that really move the needle of in terms little shifts with big impacts. And so um, I'm looking forward to sharing some of those things with people. And what's really potent for me is that rather than sort of style or opinions or aesthetical preferences, when I worked on my book Conscious Home Design, it was about I was looking for things that were universally backed in science. That really we could draw from so that because if there's any data there that helps us sort of create a framework or helps us prioritize things. Oh, okay, this isn't wish list or nice to have. This is something that we now should say, oh, okay, this is a must have kind of thing. So um yeah, so we can get into some of that too on the conversation.
I love it. I love it. And I love that you bring up you can do some little things right now. I think sometimes we get hung up
Hmm.
on, oh, I want to, tear this house down and start over, or I want
Sure.
to build a new house. And I'm all about
Hmm.
being happy now, like
Hmm.
finding peace
Hmm.
now. So I love the little things
Hmm.
that you brought up. Do you
Hmm.
want to elaborate on just a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, it's true, especially when we see all of these beautiful magazine photos or Pinterest or Instagrammable, shots, right? To look at that and say, oh, wow, I want that. But getting from here to there can be, a big undertaking. And so conscious home design really is about meeting you where you are. It's not like an all or nothing proposition. And even if you're in a limbo and in between, oh, I'm only going to live here temporarily, and so I don't want to invest into it because I planned something else in a few years, doesn't mean there's things you can't do that will just sort of, add value to your life right now rather than just have to pretend, oh, I'm just going to get through it and sort of put the blinders on to that thing you don't like or whatever. So yeah. I always knew I was going to write a book, even when I was in my college days, studying to be an architect. Um, I just didn't expect that it would take me 20 years before I published it and brought it to market. Like if you had asked 25-year-old Taylor, hey, what is your career trajectory going to look like? I had my milestones and they lining up with my age. And life didn't actually turn out the way I had imagined it. But I guess what happened was it took me 20 years of experience for my the nebulous swirling of all the different thoughts and ideas and experiences and inspirations that I had to kind of solidify and gel into a very clear, concise message that I could share. And Mark Twain once was writing a letter, and he joked, I would have to a friend, he joked, I would have wrote a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time, because it really does take time to edit and simplify a message, like, and so I put in the work, to get my message simplified. I remember I had assembled all of my thoughts and ideas and links to studies and stuff, even some going back to college papers, and I had, it was the late 2000 teens, and I had a 50-page Google Doc of all, big brain dump of all
Oh,
this
yeah.
stuff that I'd collected over decades, that I had assembled. And I was looking at this and going, how am I going to make a book out of this? Like,
Hmm.
and I've been wrestling with this beast for like months, and I was like, oh boy. And I'd done, workshops and all kinds of stuff. Finally, I talked to my editor, and she said, look, take every unique idea you have and put it on a 3x5 index card, and then lay it out on the desk in front of you and see if you can organize it and rearrange it into a storyline, into a story arc. I said, okay, that's great, because it it takes something that's just verbal and turns it into graphical or three-dimensional, or spatial rather,
Right. And
which is
especially for
good for
people
my
like
brain.
us. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And I said, and plus I was stuck. So I was like, I got nothing to lose. Right. So I went ahead and did that. And it was extremely helpful for me. First off, I realized, oh my goodness, no one is going to read a 42 chapter book about architecture. How boring, too long, no one cares. The purpose of the book was not to teach young architecture students. I was like, people
Right.
don't need to know everything that I know. They just need to know that I know the most important things. And I want to build a bridge between the profession and the non-design community. So I
Mm.
ended up, in that process, trying to write a book that was so simple that a person who doesn't know the difference between one wall and another could just read it and go, aha, I got the idea. And here's, what that could look like for me, and so that's a very powerful, experience. So as I was researching, because I didn't want it to be, like I mentioned earlier, just based on opinions or style preference, because there's tons of books out there. Everyone has their own sort of style and their niche, and everyone does their thing, and so people are left sort of shopping for designers based on, swipe left or swipe right. I like the picture of what they did, great, or I don't like the picture of what they did, okay, move on to the next one. So people are making very snap decisions based on beauty, and beauty is important, tremendously important, because we engage with our space every day. But if you don't have an underlying structure that's functional, then no amount of polish is going to make it flow for you. Yeah. So I wanted to look at some deeper stuff, sort of scientific first principles, if that analogy works. And so I was looking for, anything I could find that showed data about the effect of, I think we all know about the mind-body connection.
Hmm.
We know when we're feeling optimistic and positive, then it sends a surge of energy into the body, and we go, all right, get up and go and get into your day, and it goes both directions too. Like if the body's feeling strong, it sends signals, hey, we're ready to go, point us in a direction. Or if the body's feeling weak, it's like, hey, take it easy, we need to rest today, kind of thing, right? And so the mind body connection is powerful, and I think we all sort of just know that it's there. But the mind body environment connection is also real and less less sort of studied, and so our work as designers, as people who craft and shape the built environment, that's our job, is to help people put the mind body environment connection to work for them, so it supports them. So I came across the Harvard study for adult happiness, and maybe you've heard of it, Lindsay, or maybe some of the audience has. It was incredibly inspiring when I came across it. Apparently, it was started in 1938, and it's still going on today. So it's
I'm
the
surprised it's
oldest and
that old.
largest of its kind. Right. Yeah, 88 years now it's been going. And they've studied thousands and thousands of individuals. And they basically, did an intake form. Hey, who are you? What how are you feeling? What's your outlook on life? What's your emotional state? What's your physical health look like? What's your background? Where did you come from? Did you come from wealth and or poverty, or what get a whole sort of overview of these
Mhm.
individuals. And they tracked them for their whole lives. um, and periodically they'd get them back in and update, and say, okay, that's where they were, how are they today, okay, and they just track them. And they found that throughout the ups and downs of life that come with being alive, whether they were health challenges or career changes or business success or failure, or whether they lived in a big house, with all the all the space they needed, or if they lived in a very modest house, even if they didn't have running water, some of them, they found that while all these things mattered, they found that the single biggest predictor of people's happiness and how long they lived, actual life expectancy, was um, the quality of their relationships.
Mhm.
And so, when I read that, I was like, oh my God, stop the press. If this is the single biggest factor in people's longevity and feelings of happiness and fulfillment in life, we've got to spend more time understanding this thing called relationships. And as an architect, I'm thinking, how can the built environment um, support, encourage, strengthen relationships, opportunities for connection. So um, that was really the beginning of a dive, of a deep dive into this sort of you know process of conscious home design. And the highest calling of architecture is to help people live their best life, is to help people live happily ever after. It's the forefathers wrote it into the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. This is inalienable and self-evident. And so I think that doctors help us with life. I think that lawyers and the legal structure and system helps us with liberty, what the rules are that a society can play by. But happiness is sort of left up to the individual to haphazardly find or not. And I think that happiness in large part is the domain of designers of the built environment, because we spend so much time in buildings, and particularly our homes. Half of our lives we spend in our homes. It's going to have a tremendous influence on how we experience life. So the pursuit of happiness is largely the domain of designers. And so, um, I said, okay, well, if we know that happiness, single biggest contributing factor is relationships, then we really need to focus in on this and not just the right polish and the pretty colors and the things. Let's look at it. So, um, we can dig into that if you want, or if you've got any comments or anything you want to, some.
I'm just flashing back to so many times where I said the words, we want to balance form and function.
Yeah.
And my clients would like look at me like, oh, yeah, yeah, like a light bulb went off. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that we definitely overlook. Like you said, it has to be
Hmm.
pretty, but we also need it to be functional. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. It doesn't matter if it's magazine ready or not. If it doesn't work well for the individual and their family or the people they spend their time with, then it's all for
Hmm.
nothing.
That's right. I mean, you can buy the sexiest pair of shoes imaginable, but if they're three sizes too small, useless.
Yeah, that's a very good analogy.
Right? So yeah, so you definitely, so I just try to let people know, of course, you're going to love the look of your space. Yes, that's a given. Let's just first focus on these things, and because those really are going to, that's the bones upon which we hang all of the ornamentation
Mm.
on. So
Foundation.
the foundation that we build upon, exactly. Um, so the Greeks, I found out, so I was like thinking, okay, relationships, because the Harvard study was very clear that relationships were not limited to a partnership, a significant other. So single people, you can still live a long, happy, fulfilling life. Um, Relationships encompassed, it did include our romantic connections, our spouse or a partner, but it also included so many more. And so as I started to think about, what is this big nebulous world called relationship, let's figure it out. I came across the Greeks, who have 7 different words for love, depending on how it shows up. Is it love between a parent and a child? Is it love between two best friends? Is it love between, lovers and spouses? Is it love between a person and their community, for example? And so they have all these different words: agape and filial and eros and storge, et cetera, based on the different flavors. And that was interesting, but still not enough. I wanted to go deeper, and so I found, as I looked at all the myriad ways that we interact and engage with the world around us, that all of our relationships are going to fall into one of 3 sort of broad categories, and those are our giving, our receiving, and our reciprocal relationships.
Mm.
And so giving relationships are ones where we show up as the primary giver. And those are going to be relationships that we have with those that we're teaching or mentoring or coaching, children that we're raising or teaching or babysitting, looking after. And that's also going to extend to, even plants and animals, pets or even wild animals. If you have a bird feeder outside, that's a giving relationship that you're cultivating. So, of course, everyone's like, well, relationships are two-way. I receive more than I give, when they're talking about their dog or something. And that it's true. All relationships have a give and take, but at first blush, these are primarily giving relationships. We're taking the first step to provide, some sort of value or nurturing or care for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our reciprocal relationships are ones like you and I are having right now, where 2 equal people show up on their own feet, and they just have an exchange of ideas or being together, and so it's a different quality. You can sort of be a little bit more honest and speak from the heart. You can let your hair down, like in a parenting or role model situation where you have to have your best behavior or have a certain sort of face on. It's not, you don't have to do that in a reciprocal relationship. So relationships with our friends and colleagues, or with spouses, or anyone where there's just some sort of give and take, reciprocity.
Mm.
And it's a different quality, and you want to have, relationships like that. And then our receiving relationships, of course, are the ones where we are the beneficiary of someone else's care and wisdom and guidance. And so those are relationships that we have with our teachers or coaches, our parents, our ancestors and elders, even our heroes, and whether they're sports figures or religious, spiritual figures, anyone that's going to inspire us to, stretch a little bit more into our potential. We're always recreating ourselves, and what's the next version of you look like? And so, that growth, that opportunity, that potential, those are, receiving relationships feed us in that way. And so as we go through life, we're going to have a different balance. Like when you're college age, you're going to be spending all your time, just receiving from absorbing knowledge. And then any spare time you have, you're like hanging out with your buds, with your friends, with your girlfriends or boyfriends. It's all and there's not a lot of giving relationships happening, but soon after, um, most people start families, and then they've got young kids, and they're just giving 24/7, for years. And so, you may be going, oh man, if I just could get an extra hour, to have a reciprocal, is have some adult conversation, it would just be so nice. And so, as we go through life, we're going to experience different levels. But looking back over life, a rich life, to be a well-rounded, a well-developed person and personality, and feel like, yes, I really connected. You want to have an appropriate mix of all three kinds of relationship. And whether you're introverted or extroverted, it's going to look different what that balance is for different people. But the concept is there are three categories. And I said to myself, what would a home look like if we intentionally created opportunity for all three kinds of relationship? And so this was really the foundation of conscious home design. And you know I took it one step further and said, what would it look like? Is it even possible to create opportunities for all three kinds of relationship in every room in the home?
Mm.
Would that really, what kind of impact would that result, or provide for us? And so, when I share the Harvard study with people and say, relationships, it's the biggest driver of our happiness and longevity, our life expectancy. Statistically, everyone is an individual, but the data show, the big numbers show, this is what happens. If you do these things, this is how you live your best life. People say, "Oh, that's obvious." I always relationships, of course. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. It's for my family. I do everything I do for my family, and whenever you have free time, you want to connect with your friends or your family, or do stuff. That's what life is all about. It's about our community. But having the math behind it takes it from this vague idea of, oh, I wish I had more of this, or I want this. It takes something off of the wish list and it moves it onto the priority list. It gives you justification to make choices based on that. You don't
Yeah.
have to feel guilty. Oh, am I being selfish by asking for these relationship time? No, you are not. This is essentially what is required as a human being. Let's make sure you have it. Let's build it into your life. Yes.
I love that. And I automatically think of working in kitchen design. And I remember people asking me, is my island too big? And
Mm.
I would always just laugh.
The more the
There,
merrier.
there is never and will never be an island that is too big because and I
Yeah, there's a
love,
whole family.
yeah, I love that you tie it back into the science because, yeah, when you say relationships are what creates a happy life, people are like, oh, yeah, no brainer. But are we actually aware of that consciously
Right.
until you say that? I don't think a lot of people are. And so it just anchors it in.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It's something that we intuitively know, but if you don't verbally explicitly call it out
Yep.
and show it, then it still lacks a concrete tangibility. And so
Hmm.
once we say, oh yes, now I have words for this feeling that I always knew, you can now begin to say, okay, look, now that I have this, and you can start to look and sort of do a self-assessment, look around your home. Do I have opportunities for giving relationships? Do I have opportunities for receiving relationships? Do I have opportunities for reciprocal relationships? And so part of conscious home design is just doing that self-assessment and going through, room by room. Start with the home and go around and say, and look for your opportunities, look for your gaps. And if you find some gaps, ask yourself, am I okay with that? Or do I want to make a change and make a shift and start to balance things out? And so um, I like to use as an example, so what that actually could look like for people, right? This is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is where big idea gets traction in the real world. And so I like to use as an example a room that most people do not think of as a space for cultivating relationships,
I
and
was
that
going
is
to
the
ask this
bathroom.
question. I figured you were going to say that.
Because the bathroom is like a private space, right? So it's a place where we go to be alone, especially if you have young children, you just need that are clinging to your leg all day, and you just need a few minutes by yourself, or if you're at a party, or and you're an introvert like me, and you just need a moment to check your energy and take a deep breath before you go back out into the buzz. Or if you happen to be at Thanksgiving and a bunch of people are there and someone starts talking politics, you're like, oh my God, I gotta excuse myself and go to the bathroom, right? So it's a place to be alone and be with yourself, and also take care of the body, and just take care of business. But it's also a very ripe and rich and fertile ground to strengthen your sense of connection. And so in the bathroom, examples of a giving relationship, um, if you happen to have an outside window and you have some natural daylight coming in, then by all means, put a plant or two on the windowsill, or get a shelf nearby that, if the sill's not big enough, then put a little plant stand nearby, or hang it from the top of the window. And if you don't have a window, then put in a full spectrum light bulb somewhere, and there are many, plants that can do just fine with that kind of light. And, not only are you starting to cultivate a giving relationship, it's very low maintenance. Once a week, you take 3 steps from the sink with a little bit of water, give it to the plant, prune off a dead leaf or something, say, hello, plant, and dust the leaves off or whatever. And not only are you cultivating a bit of giving relationship there, but you've taken one step further into creating, a garden or an oasis. So rather than just sort of a dead utility space, there's life in there. And, no matter how beautiful a room is, no matter how well we design it, and that we use the perfect colors, for whoever is going to be living there, and the perfect textures and tiles and whatever, our bodies did not evolve in buildings. Our bodies evolved in nature. And so you can show 1,000 people a beautifully designed space. And while most people would say, yes, it's a beautiful space, maybe it's not my taste, but I can appreciate that it's a beautiful space. The responses are going to be different and not universal. Whereas if you show 1,000 people greenery, a bunch of green growing things, um, universally you're going to find that brain waves are going to calm, and breathing is going to become less shallow and more deep. Heart rate may slow down, resting heart rate, and blood pressure can go down, right? When we see green growing things, there's a physiological response to our bodies that happen
Absolutely.
in
You're
our bodies.
parasympathetic.
Exactly. So it's a win-win. It's not only is it cultivating giving relationships, but you're also sending an unconscious message to your body. You're in your natural environment, and therefore it's safe. And so you can relax a little bit more deeply. So I encourage people, look, put as many plants as you possibly can in every room of your home, because it's gonna mirror back to you that, hey, I'm in my natural environment. And so you don't have to get out a bucket of paint, just put some plants up. That's step number one. And on my website, I've got a PDF. It's freebie. Anyone can download it. It's the 5 best plants for indoor air quality. And so, based on NASA studies. So, that's there at Conscious Home Design. So people can have that too. It's also in the book. I mentioned it as well. So I encourage anyone to do that. And that's something you can do if you've got no plans to renovate your space. Taking it one step further, Lindsay, you could also, what about having a fishbowl in the bathroom, with a goldfish, or one of those betta fish with the beautiful fins, and so now you come in the morning, and you can sprinkle a little food in and say, hi, fish, and now it just sparks a little bit of joy. There's life, in the bathroom. So that's very fun,
It ties
if
it
you
back
want.
into, yeah, it ties back into one of the things that I say all the time, nature heals. Nature
Ah,
is a hack to connect to God. It's a hack to reset your nervous system. It is when you go out in nature, I think that's the easiest way to reset your energy. And I love that you bring it into
yes.
into a room like a bathroom. Like I'm sitting here looking at all
Hmm.
the plants that I have around me, and I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, that makes so much sense. And I never framed it the way you did. So I appreciate
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, you're welcome. And yes, we do these things naturally. If we listen to ourselves, we'll intuitively follow and do these things. Um, my job as a as that sort of scientist, the architect, who is into that, but also has the structure around, is I'm trying to create a methodology to where we do these things intentionally, because the quality of your questions will determine the quality of your results. And so if you ask good questions, you get better outcomes. And so I want to make sure we're not leaving any stones unturned, and be more intentional, and less haphazard about getting the results that we know are going to really help people live their best life. So a reciprocal relationship, I mean, we see this all the time, especially in the master bathroom. You see the double bowl sinks, so you can be side by side in the morning while you're washing your face or brushing your teeth or whatever. um, if you have the space for it, and you desire it for your lifestyle, why not have a tub that's big enough for two people? It's very calming, it's very relaxing, it's romantic. Or have a, just for efficiency's sake, you could have a shower room with two heads. And so instead of having to take turns and on the clock, you can be efficient and both shower together. I'm not talking about sexy time necessarily. I'm just saying, hey, let's just get our business done, and take our showers. Um, if you want, it's just, these are just nice examples of reciprocal relationships, and each person can decide for themselves what feels right. For a receiving relationship, we can all take um, an image of someone that we know loves us or cares for us or encourages us, and put that image, by the mirror. And so when you're there brushing your teeth, I know the body, the mind, we like to economize. We get into the habit. And I know how to brush my teeth. I don't even have to pay attention when I'm doing it. My mind can be already planning my to-do list for the whole day. Like I can be composing an email or saying or getting ready. Oh, I got to have this meeting, and then I'm going to do this. I got to drive to this place, and so I can multitask, right? But and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just we're being efficient. We're economizing. But you can take 3 seconds out of that time and just gaze at that photo and say, you know what? There's encouragement for me, or there's love for me. Someone wants the best for me. And in those 3 seconds, just feel that, and just putting a plant or just putting a photo of someone that you love, or that cares about you in your home maybe isn't going to change your life. But if you do it with intention, that's the secret sauce. That's the alchemy that really turbocharges and supercharges your little steps. When I was working out at the gym with my personal trainer, he says, hey, man, don't be absent-minded. Don't just move the machines. He says, when you're moving the machine, put your mind, put your attention, your focus on the actual muscle or muscle groups that are being worked right now. Because when you make that connection, when you put that intention into it, the results are so much faster and better. And it's the same thing with everything else that we do. So go ahead
Absolutely.
and, yeah.
Where your attention goes, energy flows. That is a easy mantra to live by.
Right. So there it is with with making these little things, making these little intentional shifts, right? And so I don't know, maybe you're like, hey, I'm Catholic, but my partner's Jewish, and you both don't want to have, for harmony in the home, you both can't agree that you're gonna have a picture of Jesus in the bathroom. It's just too prominent or whatever. That's fine. Then just find a quote, something that's less, obvious, and you can choose your own adventure. You can put your quote and they can put their quote, and just look at that, or find someone that you both do love, or are inspired by, or that you're both okay with. um, it can just be, pictures of parents or ancestors that, oh, my grandma, she was always, and you have a picture of grandma up
Well,
there. Whatever works for you. Choose your own adventure. Yeah. And just
yeah,
the point is to in that moment, in the morning before you go out into the day, or in the evening before you retire for the night, to reflect on the fact that, you know what, someone wants the best for me. I'm not alone. I don't have to do it all by myself. And how does that change the way you stand on your own 2 feet, how you show up in life? What ripples that sends out? We're working these little 2% shifts. What if 2% in every room in your house added up? If every day you felt 8% happier, 8% more confident, you know, 8% more on purpose. What would that do for your life over years, over decades in your home?
Totally speaking my language. This is all the stuff that I teach and talk about all the time. Like it's the little things, and when people are in my world and I'm teaching, they just they're like, oh yeah, it's not really that hard, but it is hard
Right.
because we don't choose it intentionally until it's brought into our awareness. One of the
Sure.
things that I wanted to say about a picture, um, I maybe wouldn't put a picture of a loved one in my bathroom, but maybe I would put a picture of a feather because a feather reminds me of my dad, or a
Uh-huh.
cardinal reminds me of my grandma.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those
Mm-hmm.
things are
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
symbolism.
Association clues,
Yep. Could
triggers.
be something that you try if you don't want a picture of somebody.
It's very subtle and personal. Like I said, if having a photo is too prominent, it feels too, too on the nose or something, then you can certainly try, like I said, a quote or a feather or something that reminds you, something association is absolutely, totally, totally valid and appropriate. Absolutely. You need to find something that works for you. The point is to inspire the feeling of connection and support and love, and that we are that we're not alone. That's really the power in the exercise. So find something that makes it reminds you of your feeling of connection.
Mhm.
So yeah, so then it's about going through the whole home, taking those same examples and say what how am I doing in the bedroom? How am I doing in the kitchen? How am I doing in the family room, in the living room, or whatever room you're looking, my office, how does that, where are my gaps? Where are my strengths? What can I do? Yeah. So I mean, if there's just like one takeaway for everyone today, that's the big one right there, because it's rooted in that data from Harvard. But we're just scratching the surface. I mean, we're just talking about the relationships, we can dig further down into it, with the hierarchy of human needs pyramid, outlined by and developed by Maslow, Abraham Maslow. It's basically no matter who you are, where in the world you are, we all have these human needs, and you can give people shelter, even beautiful shelter. But that's really just going to take care of our bodies, like a place to eat, sleep, bathe. Um, but we have higher needs. We're not just animals. We want to have opportunities for, like we touched on, love and connection and feelings of belonging. We want to have opportunities for personal development and self-growth. We want to feel like we're always stretching or growing into a greater capacity, whatever that looks like for each individual person. We also have inherent fundamental needs to be creative in some way, creative expression, whether that's playing a musical instrument or doing, something like art, or whether it's just journaling or podcasting or, baking cookies or whatever. I mean, creativity shows up in many different ways, but we want to intentionally plan for creative activities in our life, because when life gets busy and the world is pressing in and the people around us are demanding more and more of our time, creative pursuits are one of the first things that we sacrifice. And creative activities really feed us, and they keep our spark of happiness and joy alive. And if suddenly we cut that off, we may be okay for a while, but after years, suddenly you're going to start feeling like frantic, like, oh, I gotta wake up. What a piece of me has died. It's like, and then you suddenly have to rekindle that fire. And so if we can plan for creative activities in your home, in your life, so that maybe you're not Yeah, oh, I used to play cello 3 hours a day. Well, maybe you don't have 3 hours a day. Maybe you only have 15 minutes 3 times a week, or 5 minutes a day, or 1 hour once a week. But that's still something because every step you take in the direction of your dreams is going to set up a positive feedback loop. Your environment is going to mirror back to, you know what? Things that are valuable to me, things that feed me are possible. I have possibility in my life. I have some way the ability to control my destiny and shape my future. Control, shape your home, shape your future. That's really, think about the Mona Lisa. It's the most famous painting in the world. Leonardo da Vinci painted it 500 years ago. And when I was learning about this beautiful masterpiece, this work of art, I found out that it took him more than a decade to paint it. Some estimates say 15 to 17 years, but just to be conservative, it was more than 10. That he worked on this, and that when I learned about that, it just being a light bulb went off, and I said, "Oh, there it is. That's the proof. That's the example I need to help people, understand the why. Because when people understand why we want to do something, they're more motivated to actually do it. If I just give someone the how, they may or may not do it. But if they know the why behind it, now they're like, aha, I'm motivated. I have the reasoning. And so they can go ahead with that. And so you know, as Leonardo da Vinci was working on other projects, paid commissions that he had to do, or just didn't have inspiration or was inspired to do something else, he was able to put the Mona Lisa aside and come back to it when he had time in his schedule or when he had a spark of inspiration and was able to get to work on it. And he was able to complete this because he had creative space in his life. He had an art studio and he was able to safely store and keep his things when he wasn't working on them, when he was doing other things, and then come back to it when he had time. And so all of our great achievements in life, in humanity, whether it be arts, science, technology, medicine, whatever, they're um, possible in large part because of architecture. The ability to dedicate space to our activities allows us to exponentially increase the chances that we're going to have success in those activities. Seth Godin said it takes 10,000 hours to become, to get mastery at doing something. And we all know this. Practice makes perfect. It takes time and effort to become good or to accomplish anything worthwhile, even if it's just for ourselves, even if it's just a hobby. If you want to be really good at it, it's going to take some time. But what's missing from that common sense formula is it also takes space. You have to have space. You have to have the opportunity to do that. Because if you don't, then there's going to be inherent friction. If your art studio is also your dining room, then you're going to have to pack that up when it's mealtime, and then when it's time when you feel like you want to create again, you have to spend time setting up. That setup and breakdown is not only is it time, but it's also friction.
Yep.
And so when you have dedicated space to an activity, then you can just step in for 5 minutes and do that thing and
Anything that
step
we can
out.
do
And
to remove friction is going to make everything else easier and it's going to allow for us to actually do the things.
exactly. There's only so much willpower that we have. And if you're spending it all just overcoming the obstacles of
Hmm.
your built environment of reality, then you don't have much left over to do the thing you actually love. Yeah. So
Right.
we want to make the space flow and give you opportunities so that you can spend the energy you have doing the things that really matter and value and provide value for you. So that's really, why when you dedicate space to an activity, you have a higher chance of success. Obviously, think about it. If you didn't have a kitchen, how would you support a nutritious diet? Right. If you didn't have a bedroom, dedicated space to sleep and turn off and recharge, then how's that going to affect you? So we want to go through all the different needs, not just our physical needs of sleep and food, but also our higher needs of creative activity, personal development, connection, and love and belonging, and make sure we have space for those activities too. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have lots of space. You don't have to have a 5,000 square foot house to get this. It's just the way you use the space you have, or the way we allocate space within, even a 700 square foot, apartment or cottage, can be designed in a way to support all of our needs, both our
I
our,
love,
our physical needs, but our higher needs too.
yeah, and I love your emphasis on creativity because that is something that is so easily overlooked. And as you get
Hmm.
into, your 30s and 40s, you might find yourself saying things like, "Oh, I'm not creative." And that's such a
Mm,
lie. It's just that we're
mm,
so out of touch sometimes,
hmm.
or we've been
Out of practice.
out of
Haven't
practice
been
or
doing it for a
conditioned
while.
to
Hmm.
think it's a certain thing. Like you're only
Mm,
creative if you're a painter or if you play the guitar. That's not true. There's so
mm,
many different versions of creativity. And that's
yeah.
another nervous system hack of getting your
Mm,
nervous system regulated. Be creative, whether it's baking bread or painting a painting or
hmm. Hmm. So many different ways that we can be creative. There are clues. If you feel like, oh, I'm not creative, or I've lost my creative spark, and you're trying to cultivate that, there's two ways you can go about it. One is you can just say, well, just think of something, just say, I've always thought that looked interesting. Let me try it. I always thought it would be fun to do needlework. Oh, I always thought it would be fun to do whatever activity, sketching, with colored pencils, something, whatever, just try it. If you don't like it, you can always change your mind, but just try something, but then you can also look for clues in childhood,
yes, I was going
going
to say
back
the
to
same thing.
to
Hmm.
when you were young, and say, well, what did you like to do for fun? What sort of games did you do that were creative, that you were drawn to? And maybe it was supported and encouraged, and you had a chance to develop a little bit. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe you didn't have the opportunity to do it. But if you look back, you'll find some things that will spark that happiness, that joy in you, and say, okay, maybe I'll bring that forward. Now I have the time and the opportunity to do more of that. The seed was planted back then, or it was naturally, I was born with it. Who knows where it came from, but there it is. And now today it's time to germinate that, water it. And, you can throw some seeds out into the yard, and maybe they'll grow and do okay. But how much more bountiful is the harvest when we weed and water and put stakes to support for growing, and, and cultivate it. Right. And so, we're
And I believe
conscious
that
home design
we're,
is all about cultivating your home environment so that the seed of you, grows full and strong.
yeah. And that, I mean, this is a repeating message for me today. So this is so fun. Um, we are all born, we all come into this world with our unique gifts
Hmm.
to serve our purpose. And the
Hmm.
creativity, the activities where we are creative are those gifts that we should be nurturing. And they're just breadcrumbs, right? They're the breadcrumbs that are leading us to
Hmm.
the higher level of ourselves and our
Hmm.
purpose here.
Hmm. I agree 100%. No one else can be you, no one else can be me. Each one of us has a unique, our bodies, everything about us is unique. You can find someone else who maybe looks very similar, or even has a similar voice, or different, or similar attitudes or beliefs, but no one is identical to
Hmm.
you. And that's because, I understand life to be, uh, behind everything that's created is a blueprint, an energetic blueprint, a signature, and life seems chaotic, but there actually is fundamental underlying structure behind it. The world, the universe is intelligence. There is an intelligence operating behind it. And so the blueprint of each one of us is unique. And so therefore we show up unique with our own signature, our own energy signature, our own life purpose, our own bodies. And our job, I believe, is just to be as authentically ourselves, in touch with that unique spark of intelligence that we're all endowed with, and just to manifest that as beautifully as we can in any given moment.
Perfectly said. And I think the chaos that we experience is when we're fighting against our natural desire.
It can be. Yeah, sure. The thing is, the world is a big place, and there are so many cause effect relationships, trillions that are already in motion, that our minds can't possibly calculate them all. It's simply the computer isn't can't handle all of that, and so it seems like everything's happening randomly and chaotically. It's the truth is there is a cause effect relationship behind everything that's going on. We just can't see it. We can see some of it. We can see, oh, yes, I did this and now I got this. And we can see some action reaction results in our limited capacity. But the truth is, it's there for everything. And it's just so much bigger than us. And so I believe that the mind can help us make sense of things, but ultimately, it's the intuition
Mhm.
that is going to tune us into the real cause effect relationships. And the more we are in touch with our intuition, the more we're going to successfully navigate. It's like tuning in our inner GPS coordinates. We're going to more successfully navigate the chaos of the world, because the intuition knows that some cause happened over here, and there's going to be a relationship over here that's either on target or off target with harmony for yourself. And if you're paying attention to the intuition, you may get guided towards a more harmonious experience journey. You might not even realize the chaos you avoided because you didn't because you avoided it. It's like, it's not to say that we're not walking in grace. Just it's oh so cultivating the intuition helps when we have a more peaceful environment, an environment that's conducive, that doesn't have friction, that isn't agitating our minds or our emotions. When we're mentally clear, when we're emotionally calm, the voice of intuition is a little bit louder, I think, and it's easier to honor it. I'm not speaking from mastery here. Every new year, I have to make the same New Year's resolution again. I've been doing it since college. Please, Talor, listen to that intuition again, because every time you ignore it, it always turns out the wrong way. So just please pay attention even more deeply this year.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I agree. But it's all about coming back around and becoming aware, kind of like we talked about at the beginning, of bringing it into our awareness so that we can anchor it in a little bit more. We need a reminder as our human self, right?
Yes. And our homes are wonderful reminders of that. We can set them up so they're mirroring back to us, what we want. When you shape things based on your values, you're saying, hey, this is important to me, and you're reminding yourself of that. So it's really about conscious creation of your space, so that Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. I love this quote. And we just want to make sure that we're shaping them in a way that is supportive of us. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And we can it's art and science, and it's a practice. What we do is practice. It's hard to get perfect, but we can get excellent, and the the bar that we set for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from experience of designing for I don't know how many people over the course of 11, 12 years, but also
Hmm.
for myself, like um, from building my own house to remodeling a house. The house that I'm in now is I wanted a project, and boy, did I get a project. Um,
Oh yeah.
but as I continue to make these little tweaks, it feels more like me, and I know that it's going to be so rewarding. It's already rewarding each little project that I do, and I see the
Hmm.
way that it brings me calm and peace, and just like there's less static in my mind,
Hmm.
less static
Hmm.
around me when my space feels
Hmm.
like me,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it has the places where I can be creative, the place where I can enjoy my coffee and do my journaling, and and have my me time in the bathtub or whatever it might be.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's going to look different for different people. You know, what spaces they need, what aesthetic those spaces should be for them. You know, the universal part is um, you know, some spaces is making sure that spaces are size appropriate. So if you're trying to do too much, if you're trying to pack too much stuff into too small a space, then there's going to there's friction that's going to happen. You know, um, sometimes I look at people and they're just going, "Oh my God," I'm yelling at the kids all the time to pick up their stuff, or I'm yelling at my spouse or whoever the people I'm living with, the clutter, I can't stand it. And, it might not be anyone's fault. It might just be that the space isn't designed, to support the system of order and organization that's required. Like inherently high friction zones, there's several of them in the home, but one of them is the entry area.
Mm.
You can come home. Some houses don't even have an entry area. They just walk right into the family room. It's like, well, of course you're going to start seeing bags of groceries and boots and coats and paraphernalia from the outside world being littered all over your family room now because you don't have a container to receive people in when they come home. So having a dedicated foyer or vestibule or a mudroom, especially those of us that are living in the northern climates, where the weather outside is so extremely different than the sanctuary of our home inside, that we really need a buffer zone in there. And so and for that matter, if you have a foyer or a mudroom or an entry space, but it's not well designed or it's not size appropriate, if you got a family of 7 and you all come home at the same time and the space is only 6 by 6, that's not going to work. How there's not enough room for everyone, let alone for all the boots and coats and hats and everything to go in there. So you need a size appropriate space with the right storage and systems in place to contain everything. And then once, if the space is there, then it's a simple matter to just get in the habit of using it and just train yourself. And once you've gone over that initial training, it becomes automatic. And now you can spend time interacting with people that's not nagging, "Hey, pick up your thing." You can actually spend time interacting in a way that's more fun and more enjoyable. And so, you conscious home design um, supports harmony, not just the relationships, but harmonious relationships, through that. So, um, it's, well, everyone is individual, and the space needs to be custom designed for each person, for each family, for each household. So
Yeah.
that's the art. That's the art of applying the science. So
I think
it's
that's what
fun.
makes our job so fun too, because we get to do, you don't ever do the same thing twice. Every family, every home is different.
Is unique. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
having
you
me
so much.
on the show. I hope that it's been an interesting conversation for listeners. Um, and I think that understanding a little bit more about the mind body environment connection is like an essential life skill. If you understand a little bit the way a space will impact us, then we can make a few little positive changes so it's more supportive. And just like knowing how to dress for the weather or prepare a nutritious, well-balanced meal, it's an essential life skill to understand how our homes can support us. So hopefully, everyone's lens, their filter, the way they view things is upgraded a little bit from the today's conversation. And I certainly, if you don't mind, Lindsay, would love to encourage people to pick up a copy of my book, Conscious Home Design. They can order it through their local bookstore or online or even on my website, conscioushomedesign.com. Um, Happy to share a little bit of that with everyone.
Thank you again. This has been amazing. Okay, my loves, thanks for hanging with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please share it with someone and subscribe, leave me a rating, all that good stuff. And I'll see you next week.